The dust devils danced across the cracked earth of Dry Hollow, each swirling gust a miniature tempest mirroring the unseen turmoil within Silas Granger. He stood on the porch of his ranch, the relentless sun beating down, a familiar weight settling in his chest. It was a weight forged not of physical labor, but of a silence that had festered for decades. A silence he had meticulously cultivated after a singular, devastating act of betrayal. Silas was a man who had built his life on a foundation of denial, a rancher whose name had become synonymous with isolation, a man who genuinely believed he had buried the past so deep that even the earth would forget. But the earth, he was learning, had a long memory, and the whisper of the wind carried echoes of what he had tried so desperately to silence. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own making, haunted by the specter of a promise broken, a people displaced, and a legacy tarnished. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. For years, the stretch of land bordering the river Ulan had been a silent testament to a forgotten promise. It was a place steeped in the reverence of the old ways, a sacred territory, whispered the elders. But the relentless march of progress, embodied by the steel and steam of the railroad, had cast a covetous eye upon it. Silas, then a man of influence, a translator of futures, had been the conduit, the one who navigated the treacherous currents of negotiation, who promised what he could not deliver. He had been the bridge, and in his haste to secure his own standing, he had allowed that bridge to crumble. The tribe, the people whose sacred ground it was, had simply vanished. Not with the thunder of conflict or the cries of protest, but with a quiet, profound departure that left a void more agonizing than any war. Their absence became a phantom limb, a constant ache in the empty barns and silent fields. He had never spoken of it, not even to his daughter Ellie, who grew up under the illusion that their dominion over Dry Hollow was a birthright, a natural order. The legacy he had passed on was a tapestry woven with threads of deceit, a treacherous inheritance for a child. Then, one sweltering summer morning, an anomaly disturbed the predictable rhythm of Silas's self-imposed exile. Footprints, small and fresh, marked the parched ground near the ancient oak, a sentinel that had witnessed so much. Something within him stirred, a flicker of long-dormant conscience. Driven by an impulse he couldn't articulate, he gathered a basket, filling it with the simple provisions of bread, fruit, and salt, offerings of a peace he had long since shattered. He left it there, beneath the oak, the silent arbiter of his guilt, and retreated to the sterile safety of his ranch house. Sleep offered no solace, the weight of his past pressing down, the air thick with an unspoken anticipation. The next morning, the basket was gone, vanished as if swallowed by the earth. But in its place was something far more profound, a palpable presence, a feeling that even the oppressive heat of the sun could not dissipate, a quiet yet insistent awareness that the past was no longer content to remain buried. As he ventured towards his cornfield, the familiar rows of stalks seemed to warp, the landscape shifting under an unseen gaze. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. They were there, all of them, men, women, children, standing in silent, unwavering ranks. The entire tribe, their eyes steady and unblinking, met his. In that moment, a chilling certainty settled upon him. This was not an act of vengeance. It was a reckoning, a response to a debt long overdue. But the question that echoed in the vast open space was a simple, devastating one. Why? Why, after all these years of silence and absence, had they returned? And what did they want? The man who had tried to forget had been forced to confront the undeniable truth. The earth remembers, and it had finally delivered his past to his doorstep. The first tremor of understanding, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the landscape of his guilt, came with recognition. Among the stoic faces, an elder stood, her gaze piercing. It was Ashka, his childhood companion, his earth brother, a title they had shared in carefree days before fences were erected and trust was fractured. Her presence, now imbued with the gravity of age and experience, brought back a flood of memories, abrasive and unavoidable as the dust that now settled around them. The past, long suppressed, surged back with the force of a gale, a stark reminder of the innocence he had so carelessly discarded. The silence of their return was not the silence of surrender, but the profound quiet of a people who had endured, who had held onto a dignity that Silas himself had helped to strip away. He felt a profound, unsettling shame, a realization that his carefully constructed facade of respectability was built upon the very ground he had helped to steal from them. A profound unease settled over Silas as the tribe began to erect tents near the shimmering surface of the lake, their movements deliberate and silent. His daughter Ellie, her young face etched with a confusion that mirrored his own internal conflict, turned to him. "Dad," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "what did you do?" For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the habit of evasion failed him. The carefully constructed walls of his denial crumbled. He spoke of the broken agreement, of the grain that never arrived, of the schoolhouse that remained a phantom in the plans, of words spoken with the best intentions but ultimately buried by a faithless heart. As he watched the dawning comprehension, the slow erosion of her innocent perception of him, he understood that he had irrevocably lost his place as the hero in her story. The truth, once released, had a power all its own, and it was already reshaping the landscape of his most cherished relationship. The stark reality of the warehouse fire, a calculated act of malice aimed at crippling the tribe's nascent efforts, struck Silas with the force of a physical blow. Flames, hungry and destructive, devoured the stored seeds, the very sustenance of their future. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate attempt to extinguish hope, to reduce their resilience to ash. Yet what followed was not despair, but an astonishing display of quiet fortitude. The tribe, unbowed, turned to the scorched earth, their movements a testament to an inner strength that Silas found both humbling and deeply shaming. They began to plant again, their hands sifting through the remnants of destruction, coaxing life from soil still bearing the scent of smoke. This unwavering dignity, this refusal to be broken by brutality, tore at the fabric of Silas's carefully maintained detachment. He saw in their actions a mirror of his own complicity, a reflection of the same ground he had helped to seize, now being reclaimed by the very people he had wronged. Not with anger, but with an unyielding grace that amplified his guilt. Furthermore, this quiet perseverance highlighted a profound difference in their understanding of connection to the land. While Silas viewed it through the lens of ownership, of legal documents and territorial claims, the tribe perceived it as an intrinsic part of their being, a source of spiritual sustenance as much as a provider of physical needs. Their act of replanting in the burnt ground was not merely an agricultural endeavor, it was a sacred ritual, a reaffirmation of their ancestral bond, a defiance of those who sought to sever it. This deep, almost spiritual rootedness presented a stark contrast to Silas's own detached relationship with the land he worked, a relationship defined by transaction and profit rather than reverence and belonging. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that his attempts to manage the land had been a profound misunderstanding of its true essence, a failure to grasp the interwoven tapestry of life and spirit that the tribe so naturally embodied. Conversely, the subsequent departure of his daughter, Ellie, marked a devastating personal consequence, a sharp counterpoint to the tribe's unwavering resolve. Her note, a simple yet profound indictment, declared, "I can't live in a place where truths are hidden between crops." This was not a rejection of Dry Hollow itself, but a condemnation of the environment of secrecy and evasion that Silas had fostered. He understood, in that moment, that the true loss was not the land he had helped to betray, but the fractured relationship with his own child, a casualty of his lifelong commitment to denial. The land, he finally grasped, was merely the stage upon which this deeper, more personal tragedy was unfolding. His daughter's departure was a direct result of his inability to confront his own past, a chilling testament to the corrosive nature of unacknowledged truths, proving that the most destructive fires are often those ignited within the heart. This profound realization forced Silas to confront a painful truth about his own narrative. He had always seen himself as a man of action, a rancher capable of managing his affairs and securing his future. Yet the events unfolding before him revealed a fundamental flaw in his self-perception. His actions, driven by a desire for acceptance and a deep-seated fear of his own past, had ultimately led to the alienation of his daughter and the exposure of his moral bankruptcy. The dignity of the tribe, their quiet strength in the face of adversity, served as a constant, unyielding reminder of his own failings. He had sought to build a respectable life by burying his transgressions, but in doing so, he had only succeeded in creating a deeper chasm, a more profound isolation, not just from the land and its original inhabitants, but from the person he most desperately wanted to be for his daughter. The scorched earth and the empty space where his daughter once stood were silent witnesses to the true cost of his carefully constructed life. The second obstacle presented itself not as a physical threat, but as a legal and social siege. Neighboring farmers, their livelihoods intrinsically tied to the same land and water sources, began to exert pressure. They wielded not weapons of war, but the sharper, more insidious tools of bureaucracy and legal precedent. Ancient documents, long gathering dust, were unearthed, reinterpreted to justify exclusion. Declarations of property rights, once respected agreements, were twisted into instruments of dispossession. This was a conflict waged in courtrooms and county offices, a battle fought with ink and parchment, where the very laws designed to protect could be weaponized against the vulnerable. Silas, a man who had always sought to avoid confrontation, who prided himself on his measured approach to disputes, found himself standing at a precipice. The ingrained fear of conflict, a deeply personal aversion, warred with a nascent yet powerful sense of moral obligation. He saw the faces of the tribe, their quiet dignity in the face of this systematic dismantling of their existence, and a fire ignited within him, a spark of defiance against the calculated injustice. Consequently, Silas Granger, the rancher who had once brokered the land's surrender with a whisper and a promise, found his voice. It was a voice unused to such public pronouncements, a voice accustomed to the solitary conversations with the wind and the earth. He stepped forward, not as an advocate for his own interests, but as a shield for those who had been rendered voiceless by the machinations of others. He challenged the legality of their claims, questioned the interpretation of the old laws, and stood as a bulwark against their systematic expulsion. This act of public defense, however, came at a steep price. The alliances he had carefully cultivated, the friendships that had provided him with a sense of belonging in Dry Hollow County, began to fray. Clients, valuing expediency and a quiet adherence to the established order, distanced themselves. His reputation, the carefully constructed image of the honorable man, the respected citizen, began to crumble, not under the weight of his past transgression, but under the burden of his present courageous stand. He was shedding the persona he had worn for years, a shedding that was both painful and, in its own way, liberating. Building on this, however, was the internal erosion of the very identity Silas had so painstakingly preserved. In defending the tribe, he was forced to confront the hypocrisy that had underpinned his life. The respectable citizen he had strived to be was a carefully curated illusion, a facade built upon the silent betrayal of a people. The courage he now displayed was not a sudden acquisition, but a reluctant awakening, a response to the undeniable moral imperative that his previous actions had ignored. He realized that true honor, was not about maintaining an image, but about aligning one's actions with one's deepest convictions, however inconvenient or costly that alignment might be. The loss of prestige, the alienation of former associates, these were not merely external consequences, they were the internal recalibration of his own moral compass, a recalibration that stripped away the superficial layers of societal approval to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth of his character. Furthermore, this period marked a critical juncture in Silas's understanding of interconnectedness. He had always viewed the tribe as a separate entity, an other whose fate was distinct from his own. However, their legal entanglements directly impacted the broader community of Dry Hollow, revealing how deeply intertwined their destinies were. The farmers who sought to expel the tribe were not acting in isolation. Their actions were driven by economic anxieties and a perceived competition for resources, anxieties that Silas himself had once shared and exploited. By defending the tribe, Silas was indirectly challenging the very foundations of a system that prioritized individual gain over collective well-being. He was beginning to see that the prosperity of Dry Hollow was not a zero-sum game, but a shared endeavor, and that the exclusion of any one group ultimately diminished the whole. His actions, therefore, were not just about righting a past wrong, but about fostering a more inclusive and sustainable future for the entire region. The internal struggle intensified as Silas grappled with the consequences of his actions. He had lost the external markers of respectability, the validation he had so desperately sought. But in their place, a different kind of strength began to emerge. The fear of conflict, once a paralyzing force, was gradually replaced by a resolute determination. He understood that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. The legal battles were arduous, the social ostracism isolating, but each challenge overcome solidified his commitment. He was no longer the man who had facilitated dispossession. He was becoming the man who stood in defiance of it, a transformation forged in the crucible of adversity and fueled by a dawning sense of accountability. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with further challenges, but Silas Granger had finally begun to walk it. The third turning point arrived not with a sudden cataclysm, but with the reappearance of Ellie, a shadow of her former self, yet accompanied by an unexpected presence. She carried with her not a plea for reconciliation, but a formal marriage proposal, a tangible symbol of a life she had forged elsewhere, a life now intertwined with Kai, Ashka's own grandson. This union, conceived in the fertile ground of shared resilience and mutual respect, represented a profound reweaving of the severed threads that had once bound Silas to the tribe. What Silas had desperately tried to conceal, what he had buried beneath layers of denial and self-preservation, Ellie, in her unvarnished honesty, brought into the light, transforming it into something sacred. The wedding ceremony itself, a solemn affirmation of renewed kinship, unfolded beneath the very oak tree where Silas had once abandoned his offering, a silent witness to the cyclical nature of consequence and redemption. As Ashka, her eyes holding a wisdom etched by years of hardship and unwavering spirit, met Silas's gaze, her simple words, "Now I do, Earth Brother, now I do," resonated with a power that transcended mere acknowledgement. It was an acceptance, a forgiveness offered not as a gift, but as a hard-won recognition of shared humanity, a testament to the enduring strength of bonds that had weathered betrayal and distance. Beyond this immediate reconciliation, the union served as a powerful catalyst for communal healing. The marriage was more than a personal commitment. It was a symbolic act of integration, a bridge built between two worlds that had long been estranged. For Silas, it meant witnessing the tangible result of his daughter's independent spirit, a spirit that had not been broken by his past, but had instead found strength in forging its own path, a path that now led back to the very community he had once forsaken. This integration underscored the idea that genuine connection could not be forced or manufactured. It had to be cultivated, grown from seeds of shared experience and mutual understanding. The union of Ellie and Kai represented a natural evolution, a testament to the inherent human capacity for finding common ground, even after periods of profound division. It was a living embodiment of how future generations could transcend the mistakes of the past, creating a new narrative rooted in collaboration rather than conflict. Moreover, the presence of Kai, as a descendant of Ashka and a partner to Ellie, represented a profound shift in the generational dynamic. He embodied a future where the legacy of the past was not a burden to be carried in silence, but a history to be understood and learned from. His willingness to embrace both his tribal heritage and his connection to Silas's lineage spoke volumes about a new era of understanding. This intergenerational connection was crucial, demonstrating that reconciliation was not solely about appeasing past grievances, but about actively building a shared future. Kai's perspective, unburdened by the direct trauma of the original betrayal, offered a clear-eyed view of the present, one that could embrace the possibility of a unified dry hollow. His presence at the wedding was not merely symbolic, it was foundational, representing the living embodiment of a future where past divides could be bridged through love and shared purpose. Furthermore, the very act of the wedding under the old oak tree served to reclaim a space that had become laden with negative associations. By choosing this site, a place previously marked by Silas's abandonment, the tribe and Ellie were transforming it into a symbol of hope and renewal. It was a deliberate act of recontextualization, imbuing the familiar landscape with new meaning. This reclamation was not about erasing the past, but about overlaying it with a more positive and forward-looking narrative. The oak, which had once stood as a silent witness to Silas's solitary act of guilt, now presided over an event that celebrated connection and the promise of a shared future. This transformation of a symbolically charged location underscored the power of conscious choice in shaping both personal and communal identity, demonstrating how physical spaces could become anchors for new beginnings. The subtle yet profound shift in Ashka's perception of Silas, articulated in her simple "Now I do, Earth Brother," marked a critical moment of earned acceptance. This was not a forgiveness granted easily, but one painstakingly earned through Silas's subsequent actions, his public defense, and his daughter's courageous integration of their lives. It signified a re-establishment of a bond that had been irrevocably broken, a testament to the possibility of redemption through sustained effort and genuine change. This moment was not about forgetting the past, but about acknowledging its weight and choosing to build something new upon its foundations. It was a powerful illustration of how deep-seated wounds could begin to heal when met with consistent acts of sincerity and a willingness to embrace a shared humanity. The final resonant echo of this turning point came weeks later, nestled within the personal effects of Silas's deceased wife. A hidden letter, a ghost from a life lived in the shadows, offered a profound revelation. Its words, "If someone ever comes back, it's because you still have a chance to be whole," illuminated the true nature of the gestures that had preceded it. The bread, once perceived as a solitary act of penance, was revealed as an apology, a silent overture. Similarly, the tribe's return was not a demand for retribution, but a response, an acknowledgement of Silas's nascent attempt at amends. This letter provided Silas with the crucial missing piece of the puzzle, revealing that his perceived salvation had been merely an initial step in a much longer journey of reconciliation. He finally understood that the actions he had taken were not endpoints, but rather the opening of a door, a fragile invitation to begin the arduous process of becoming whole again. Reflecting on this journey so far, we see a landscape irrevocably altered, not by grand pronouncements, but by the quiet unfolding of consequence and the persistent tendrils of memory. The echoes of past decisions, once muffled by distance and time, have converged, creating a resonant hum that demands attention. It is akin to observing a river, its currents initially disparate and seemingly insignificant, gradually merging, their collective force shaping a new, powerful channel. The fragments of understanding, painstakingly gathered, begin to form a cohesive whole, revealing not a destination, but a profound reorientation of perspective. The weight of unspoken truths, once a solitary burden, has found its counterpoint in the collective journey of healing, suggesting that true strength lies not in isolation, but in the shared vulnerability of acknowledging what has been lost and what can yet be reclaimed. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer, illuminated by the dawning realization that foundations built on evasion are inherently unstable. The resilience displayed in the face of adversity, the quiet dignity that persevered through hardship, speaks to a deeper wellspring of human spirit than any material possession or legal claim could ever represent. It is a testament to the enduring power of community, a silent assertion that belonging is not granted, but earned through shared experience and mutual respect. The very fabric of existence, it appears, is woven with threads of interconnectedness, and to sever one strand is to weaken the entire tapestry. This understanding, hard-won through trials that tested the very core of loyalty and integrity, points towards a future where true prosperity is measured not by individual accumulation, but by the collective well-being and the strength of shared bonds. As we pivot towards the final reflection, it becomes evident that the narrative arc has moved beyond the simple recounting of events to an exploration of transformation. The individual journey, marked by the painful shedding of a false self, has paved the way for a broader, more communal awakening. The initial act, seemingly small and perhaps even insignificant in its solitary inception, has rippled outwards, its true impact amplified by the reciprocal response it ultimately elicited. This convergence suggests that every action, no matter how private or seemingly inconsequential, possesses the potential to ignite profound change, to initiate a dialogue that transcends the boundaries of personal guilt and fosters a shared path toward restoration. The landscape of Dry Hollow, once defined by division and silence, now holds the promise of a new narrative, one where the lessons of the past are not merely remembered, but actively integrated into the fabric of a shared future. The last letter, a whisper from a life silenced too soon, had finally articulated the unspoken truth that had haunted Silas Granger's quiet years. It wasn't the offering of bread that had been the salvation, but the subsequent return of the people, a profound response to a tentative apology. He finally understood that the gesture, born of a desperate need to quiet the persistent guilt, was never meant to be a solitary act of penance. It was an invitation, an opening of a door that had been sealed shut for decades by his own hand. The tribe's presence, their quiet return, not for reclamation, but for healing, was their answer to that fragile overture, a testament to a resilience that had weathered betrayal and endured the silence. Dry Hollow, once a landscape defined by absence and unspoken regret, was now becoming a testament to a different kind of presence, one built on shared memories and the slow, arduous work of mending what had been broken. Today, Dry Hollow is no longer merely dust and the whisper of regret. It is a place of shared breath, of communal effort. The tribe returned, not to reclaim what was lost through legal means or forceful assertion, but to heal a land that still bled memories of injustice. And Silas, the rancher who had dedicated himself to forgetting, found himself compelled to remember. He was forced to confront the choices that had shaped his life, to shed the pretense of respectability that had been built on a foundation of deceit. His journey from isolation to a reluctant participant in a collective act of mending was a profound redefinition of self, a becoming of the man he should have been from the very beginning. The man who had once facilitated a silent departure was now an integral part of a people's quiet return, a return that was not an act of retribution, but a powerful affirmation of enduring connection. The true practice, as Silas now understood, begins not with grand gestures or solitary acts of atonement, but with the patient, often difficult, work of rebuilding trust, one slow step at a time. It is in the listening, in the sharing of burdens, and in the courage to acknowledge the painful truths that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. The past, though it may leave scars, does not have to dictate the future. The legacy that Silas had once feared was a betrayal can now be transformed into a foundation for a more honest and connected existence. The presence of his daughter, Ellie, now intertwined with the very people he had once forsaken, serves as a constant reminder that true belonging is forged in the crucible of shared experience, not in the isolation of self-preservation. The path to wholeness is paved not with the erasure of memory, but with the courageous integration of its lessons, a process that continues to unfold, day by quiet day, under the watchful gaze of the ancient oak.